There's been many times where I've pulled back and come up to music, and that it's been reliably always there when I needed it, in terms of when an idea presented itself, that when I showed up and committed to it, and committed to it in a way that, like, okay, this is a its own thing, its own little project, its own little idea that has its own parameters. As long as I honor those parameters, as deeply as I possibly can, it'll eventually blossom into whatever it needs to be. It's like cooking, I suppose. Once you learn how to cook something really well, it's fun to cook it again. To me, it's almost similar to that in some ways.
I'm really excited here to have Kevin Germain on the show today. Kevin is one of our members in the Composer's Brain. It's my private studio that we run online on the school platform. So thank you so much, Kevin, for being here.
Sure. Thanks for talking with me. I really appreciate it. This is a lot of fun.
The interesting thing I want to share about you, which might interest people that are watching right now, is your background and to getting into composition and actually like continuing on with composition now is
Yeah.
really interesting to me. I'd really love to learn more about that first, and then I want to play one of your
Yeah.
pieces. Yeah, that would be a
Sure.
lot of fun.
Yeah, I've had a pretty strange journey, I guess. It's fairly eclectic. I started off as a guitar player when I was like 12, and I started at sort of this. It was a music studio in town, and it was really they were really very professional. And they did that model that comes from it was an Italian owner who taught accordion, and but it does that methodology where they'll do large groups. And so there was often bands, like accordion bands, so like of like 10, 20, 30, 40 accordion players. So I got them, both my sisters played accordion, and they were older than I was. And my parents said, well, you're welcome to pick an instrument if we want, we can set this up. I was like, I don't want to play accordion, I want to play guitar. So that's how that kind of started. And
What?
I
How old were you?
at that time I was 12, I think, when I started.
Okay, okay. So of course, a 12-year-old would prefer to play guitar over
Yeah, I was
accordion.
like, yeah, I
Well,
don't think so. Yeah. I mean, in hindsight, I'm like, wow, that was really amazing. But the really nice sort of component to that was that I learned to read music like really well. It was really natural for me, and the methodology that they had there at the studio was really top notch. So we learned to read charts and how to follow conductor, and things like that. So it was very edifying at that age. It was really unusual for like a guitar player to learn how to read at that time. It's not so much now. And then later on, I sort of decided, I really enjoyed playing music. So I went to college in Boston. I went to Berklee School of Music, and as a performer at first. But I soon discovered that I really didn't have the thing, the knack for jazz. Like I love jazz, but the ear for it really didn't strike me. But all of a sudden, I started listening to Bartok and things like that. I'm like, whoa, this is like sort of a revelation at that time. So this would have been in like the late 80s, early 90s.
you
So
were
I had a couple
exposed to
teachers.
Bartok while you're in college,
Yeah,
for example. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And Bach and things like that, in a deeper level than I had already been exposed to before. So, and that's when that spark of composition really sort of like, oh, people write this, people do this, and there's things that you can, there's a lot of different approaches that you can do. So that was like my sort of early schooling, I guess, if you could say.
So the composition stuff, it emerged out of playing the guitar. It emerged out of seeing scores by Bach, by Bartok,
Yeah,
people like that, and realizing,
yeah.
hey, like people today could be writing stuff like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and seeing people do it and going to show, like, the New England Conservatory used to go. I started going shows to all the student shows there at that time, and John Cage, which would be in the audience, or they would do. There's all these kinds of things that they would do, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. It was really fun. It was really transcending. The amount of things that people were doing at that time in Boston was great. It was a lot of fun.
No, and hearing about stories because we have a few members in the group, like for example, Stephen, who talks about like Elliot Carter and seeing him in the
Yeah.
flesh and things like that. Does just boggles my mind, right? Because
Oh yeah.
that's a different generation that
Right.
I
I get
wasn't
it.
exposed to. So
Yeah.
I want to actually just start off playing one of your pieces from a few years ago. It's called Pastoral for string quartet. This is fun because this is going to be a live recording. This
Yep.
is about right near the end of this. I believe it's the second movement, right?
Yeah.
So let's take a
Yeah.
listen. it's in the 80s, you're in college, you're writing all this, you're writing a bit of music and you're also playing guitar. What's going on between then and then like this piece that we just heard right now? Because that's quite a lot of time now. I
There's a
mean,
big gap.
and what,
Yeah.
what's kind of like the journey there, like still being able to compose now, like writing this piece just a few years ago, I'm assuming during COVID. Like, how are you
Yeah.
able to keep this up? I see you're at a bookstore. I would love
Yeah.
to know more about that. Like your
Yeah, all kinds of
stories
things
are,
happened. I think I have a really strong case of what do you call it, the shiny object syndrome. So I've always been struggling with that. So I've sort of been through certain phases and things have come and gone. Like so after college in Boston, I ended up playing in a lot of the rock bands that were in town, doing that for a long time, for a while. But then also we had a family, got married, started working in Boston, doing graphic arts, and also starting becoming interested in music from Turkey. And started meeting musicians in the area that played Turkish music, and so I started studying Turkish music. So I started playing with people, and then also writing in that style. Some of the musicians that I met at that time, who were really great, would apply this like sort of jazz sort of approach to playing ethnic music, or music from other places. And so we would play these Turkish songs and then we'd do these like really long improvisations on them. And so, just trying to like tie my like sort of strange, I went here, I went there, went here. I'm not sure really how I describe it. I learned how to, like to really to be kind of free with what I'm hearing, free with the instrument, free with ideas and like the possibilities that were potentially out there. Between that time, I didn't actually do a lot of like chamber music writing. I did mostly writing for Oud, writing for small ensemble. Most of it was usually improv based. It used to be like a chart based sort of thing, just like a lead sheet. Then my wife and I, we moved to Northampton. In 2000, and that sort of started to drift off as time and things like that sort of took over. So there was sort of a gap in time where I didn't really have a lot of opportunity, or I didn't take the opportunity to do a lot of writing. So there was a period of about maybe 10, 15 years where I didn't do an intense amount of writing. That being said, there was always moments where I'm like, oh, I'd write a little piece here, write something for guitar, write little solo pieces here and there, do transcriptions of music and things like that, like Rebettica music or Greek music. And that kind of brings me to the pandemic. During the pandemic for me was really sort of like, oh, there's a lot of things to be said there, but I realized at that time that like here, we're sequestering ourselves, pretty much by ourselves for the most part. Here's an opportunity to sort of restruct, rethink about what's going on. I mean, that was at the point in time where like that string quartet we just played, sort of grew out of that. So where I recommitted myself to fully wanting to, write for chamber music, to write cloud, in that style and in that world.
yeah, and since then it seems like you've been writing a lot of music. I mean, at least from a third party perspective, it looks,
Yeah.
I mean, is that accurate like compared to what you were doing before?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I've been, things are just kind of, I've held a lot back. And
Yeah.
that was part of the pressure cooker, so to speak, when the pandemic came. It's like, it was what I really wanted to do at the very beginning. I was returning back to what I wanted to do, like,
It's like
started in the 80s, 90s.
because I feel like during that time it was the opposite effect for some people, and as far as composers go, some people were saying, "I just want to compose now. That's what's important to me." And I also saw a lot of composers say, "You know what? This is not as important to me. I would rather do
Yeah.
something else." And it looks
I
like
agree.
you were the former. You said, "No, actually, what I really want to do is compose," and you haven't stopped since.
Yeah.
It seems
Yeah,
like.
no, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, definitely. That's definitely what happened.
As someone that, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I do music all the time, right? I teach
Yep.
music, I compose music. I'm doing this
Yeah, it's
this
amazing.
little interview with you. I'm actually really, really, really keen to know from folks like you that have, what we call a day job or doing something
Right.
else outside of music. Like
Yep.
how I'm like I admire people that are able to do something completely different, but then say, actually, you know what? What's really important to me is writing this music. I don't care
Hmm.
what happens to it. I don't care if it gets performed. I don't care if it's commissioned. I don't care if I get paid for it. No matter what, I'm writing this music because I need to write this music. How are you able to do that? I would love to know about that.
Wow, that's a great question. How I'm able to do it, I guess, is, I mean, it's really just something that has to happen. I mean, they're like things that just like pour out of me. And I mean, and to be, perfectly honest, I mean, your method of like, the low res to high res idea really facilitates that because I've always had a lot of low res pieces back in my mind, so to speak. Like, oh, would that be a really great idea? Like, like, or the idea of like a musical thought experiment. Like, wouldn't it be cool if you like, you had like an accordion player and a vibraphone player and, what could happen out of that, for example. But, my inspiration, I mean, the music that I write it really is sort of like an inspiration from the life that I'm like that my wife and I sort of made together and our family made together. So, somehow the bookstore's in the music writing somehow. Like, so my external life, the other stuff that I do outside in my world somehow shows up and informs what I do in some way.
So it's not separated. You think of
No.
it all as one like
Yeah.
one life together. Not to sound cliche, but
Yeah.
that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's funny. It's really intuitive. It's I mean it's very subjective, but it's not like something you can put really finger on and
yeah.
say, well, this is the reason why.
I love to know a little bit. I think it's a good time to segue to your actual process because you mentioned the low to high res thing, which we do in the community. Let me go ahead and share my screen because you shared with me some drafts. I actually haven't even seen any of these drafts. I've seen a bunch of your other drafts,
Well, that'll be fun.
but so for me, this is completely new. And I have let's see, I have my little piano tech thing, and I don't have microtones set up
Yeah,
here. So
yeah, yeah.
if we need them, do we need any of them? Do you have any of
Not in
those
this
ones?
particular
Okay, okay, so we're
yeah.
good. So why don't you walk me? So I have 4 pages, not to, but why don't you walk me through like what do you do first? What do you do second? Things like that. Just walk me through your process,
Sure.
what you're doing
Uh,
here.
yeah, sure. So without getting too wonky about like, so this
Yeah,
is
of course.
technically the eighth piece of a song cycle I'm in the process of working on, which I've brought in here a few others before. So there's the poem on the left and the upper and left corner that I derived from some text. I actually wrote those words. There's the text that I was pulling from is I think it's 15th century text that was, I believe it was in Latin, but it was translated into English. The text there is my interpretation of from this alchemical text from that century. That's what I started with in terms of like the text is first. And then had been listening to a lot of Schubert, and there was a melody that I heard that I was like I really fell in love with, and I thought I'd use it as a brief model. And so that is from the fourth line down.
This
Uh,
one right here.
yeah.
Do you mind if I
Yes.
play? So this is from a
Yeah.
Schubert D799. Is that what you have
Yeah.
there? Is it all 4 of these bars?
Yeah. It's just the four bars exactly.
Okay, it's not gonna be perfect, but let's see. So is a key signature, is there a
It's
key?
S. Isn't that one flat?
Okay, so that's a B flat. All right, let's try it again. Round two. Correct?
Yeah, it's pretty close. I mean, yeah,
Was
the
that a
D
D?
wasn't
Was that a
D.
D or an E?
That's a D, yeah.
Okay, well,
You get the
we'll
idea.
edit it out later.
Okay.
Just kidding. Very nice. Okay, so it's like a very lyrical thing that starts on the third and ends on the third of
Right,
F major. Okay.
right. Exactly. And what follows is my variations on that melody. I did at least nine variations. I might do some more potentially.
So this is what
So
you mean by the low. Yeah, I'm just trying to. This is interesting. So you start out with the Schubert, but then you did kind of like this is kind of like your low res, right?
right,
Your version of
exactly.
the low res is taking the Schubert and saying, okay, what are different rhythmic versions of the Schubert that I can do? And you basically also always start on the A and end in the A.
Yeah, I did that was one of the things that appeals to me, and I've noticed that in other
Yeah.
songs in 4A and Mahler, for example, where having the third is sort of a nice vocal melody that I kind of like.
Yeah, but that's what is common about all of these, which keeps the same, which keeps it in line with the Schubert, even though it's not like the Schubert, it keeps it in line with the first A and the last A. So I'm getting into my teaching mode now. I
Yeah,
don't
I
mean
get
to
that.
do
Yeah, yeah,
that,
that's good.
but
That's great.
I'm geeking out over your process here. So then you have those five, and then you have the other four, six, seven, eight, nine. Okay, very cool.
So another one thing to point out on the first page there is this is actually really the first, is it strophic, I think the term, text that I've actually really set in for this cycle, where it's repetitive. The previous pieces that I did for this cycle were very through composed. So this is really the first sort of stanza by stanza where the the meter scheme is pretty much the same technically. And because since I technically wrote the poem, I have been changing the words here and there to sort of, to match the melody as it arises. Like, oh, I can add a word here, or I can take a word out here. On the second page, I start on the very top stanza and the very bottom. I started writing out some piano ideas, sort of accompaniment ideas.
So you have them split so that there's a piano at the very top, two lines, and then you have
Yeah,
piano at the, yeah. So it's not like, it's interesting because it's not like you're writing this a lot of times. And one reason I like to highlight this, what you're doing here, is because when you're composing, some people think you just compose from the beginning to the end, but you're not
yeah,
doing that at all. You're
no,
focusing on one idea, working it out. And then if you have some other idea, you allow yourself to say, "Hey,
yeah,
I actually have this piano idea. Let me just write it
yeah.
out, even though it doesn't go here on this spot
Yeah, it's
necessarily."
like,
Right?
for me, like these sort of scenarios, it's very much like, what is the atmosphere I'm trying to create? Like what do I need to bring into this piece in order to recreate the atmosphere that I'm hearing in my head? And then, what is it realized on paper? So, like on the first page, at the very top towards the right, I wrote a bunch of adjectives, for example,
Right here.
otherworldly, lonely, time, noble,
Good.
eternal. It's pretty subjective, like what does that actually mean in terms of, musical choices? But for me, that motivates the melodic and harmonic choices and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like, and this is also this is very low res in
Right.
terms of you're not even putting any pitches down. It's just
No,
words. Yeah, but they're
no.
important. It's a North Star, basically. What are you
Yeah.
trying to do? Very cool. So yeah, the piano stuff here. What else is going on here? So draft three.
Yeah, so there I'm starting to like, as it's funny, as I started, so I started with the melody, like what I want the melody to, like, at least kind of like what world I want the melody to be in. And then it very quickly becomes, well, all right, well then what's the harmony?
Mm,
What's the accompaniment going to be? As you can and so the very top of that page is my continuing of playing with the atmospheric sort of structure. But then I realized, like, oh, well, I really need to, what I'm bringing here is like the harmonic question that this piece for me proposes. And I started, after all these talks with the group, doing, this is really actually one of my first like timelines where you see the line down the bottom where it says winter, spring, summer, and fall. I kind of had that. Yeah, that's it. So that's my yeah, that's essentially my timeline. Although it isn't metered or by minutes, I do have an idea of like the sections and how many stanzas. So there's about six stanzas that I'm going to fit into like a four base structure. This harkens back to the like what you said you like to call the North Star in this instance, where the primary idea around here is being true to the alchemical inspiration behind these whole pieces. And so using the seasons is really the point of, that's what it's going to go through. That's the form that it's going to be passing through, starting with winter, moving to spring, summer, and fall, and still in the process of working on, like the harmony for me in this sense is going to be, that's going to be the touch point that's going to reflect that the most.
yeah. So it's a step-by-step process for you. You focused a lot first on that initial melody
Yeah,
with Schubert as the starting point, which is interesting. And then you moved on to, I have some piano sketches that maybe those were inspirational things
yeah,
that just happened. And
yeah,
then from what I understand, you realized, okay, I need some kind of harmonic schema, and you did that in the form of winter, spring, summer, fall. So it's actually very, very, a lot of what you're doing is actually a lot more streamlined than what I do. Sometimes my sketches are, you guys have seen my sketches.
oh yeah.
It's kind of a mess, but I
That's
try
great though. I
I
love that.
try
This is actually really unusual for me. I'm not, I mean, when you say like, oh, I want to talk and, put you online and like, oh, I gotta show something. But I mean, it just happened to work out this way. I mean, this is This is unusual for me, but not that unusual. I've gone really far in terms of being disordered. I'm not typically disordered. It's a lot more, it's often a little more chaos in terms of like what I'm putting on paper.
I think what happens, because I used to be a lot more organized because the way I teach you guys low res to high res is very structured. But the reason I do that is because you really have to start. It's almost like you're relearning how to compose. I don't know if you felt that way at all.
In some ways, yeah.
Yeah, the more along you go, you will find your own versions of the low res to high res, right? And you are
Right.
starting to do that. So it's not, yes, it is very strict in the beginning, but
Hmm.
only so you can, okay, know kind of what the parameters are. Now let me break them
Yeah.
into my own version,
Right.
which is then it becomes fun. And I
Right.
think you're at that stage, which is awesome. And then let's see, let's do one more. And then I want to hear some music. Ah, and now you're kind of like putting it all together.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
looks like you're
Exactly.
writing music from beginning to end
Yeah.
in a more traditional format. So this is like page four of your, and
Yes.
now we're getting,
Yeah. Now
yeah.
I'm starting to really get a feel of where this is going. This is going to be the harmony. I'm still struggling with some things, but like for me, these are the hardest parts. Is like, oh, what is it? What's the actually going to be?
But the nice thing is that you have something to fall back on. So like when you're stuck, you have these 3 pages,
Right.
which I think is very useful because now it's like, okay, you're gonna be stuck. It's just inevitable. You will be
Right.
stuck at some point. But then the nice thing is you don't have to be stuck from a blank page. You're
Right.
stuck with actually a lot of stuff you already work through. So it's already
Yeah. It's
there in
like
the
a
back of your head.
specific problem that you're. Yeah.
Yeah, it could feel like you're problem solving, but that's because you are.
Yeah. Or question solving, really. Maybe it's not a
Yeah.
problem per se. It's just like, well, what is this question? It's finding that question and then trying to find, okay, what's the solution for that thing that I posed for myself, essentially.
Yeah. So I want to actually now hear what a finished product sounds like after going through all of this
Hmm.
because you did go through this process with this piece,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did.
So this is like the final end result. So you put it into the notation software. What notation software do you use?
Sibelius.
This is Sibelius, okay. So Sibelius, MuseScore, Dorico, it doesn't really matter. You put it in here, you get it played through MIDI, or in this case, you had a live performance. So
Hmm.
we're going to go ahead and actually hear the entire piece. So let's go ahead and hear this movement here for soprano and piano.
Let my friends know that no impure or slaughtered things are useful for our purpose.
why don't you talk a little bit about this piece? I'm also really interested in like the performance aspect of this
Hmm.
because you actually also got this piece performed. So I'd really
Yes.
love to hear that. Like, what's it like to like go through this entire process, sketching, putting it into the software, and then actually hearing it? Like, what is that like for you?
Oh, it's great. I mean, it's fun. It's, I mean, talking to musicians about the work and I mean, doing something, having an image of what you want to do, and then have, the process. I enjoy the process. I enjoy the physical process, the paper, pencil to paper process, and then having software that gives you the feedback of like, oh, well, this is the flow that's going on is we didn't have that years ago. Back in the 90s. I think was it Finale was the first one, and it was really wonky. It was, I mean, it was good, but compared to the years before, I mean, honestly, I don't know how people wrote before. It's amazing to me that people even were able to you can write a 40-minute piece and know that the pacing is correct. To me, that's amazing. That speaks to like a level of musicianship that I can't even imagine. But so what else would you want me to talk about the performers?
Well,
Do you want
I find it interesting. Like for example, like in this piece, you have this technique. Well, first of all, like the piano part is fairly standard piano part, right? There's no like crazy. You mentioned
No,
John Cage. There's no like John Cage prepared piano thing, right? So
right,
we know what the piano part is going to sound like, right?
right.
But you have in the voice part, you have this like kind of spoken. You call it spoken half whisper, as if in confidence. You have this, so
Yes,
it's very actually it's very specific what you want. So when you're working with the singer, did you have to coach them through that? Like, did they know what you meant by that? Like, how did that work? And also the way in the score, you don't really have bar lines or anything like that. So the timing,
right.
how did that work with the time? How much did you have to coach them? Was it a back and forth process, or they just like, hey, this is clear to me, let's do it?
There was some coaching that had to happen. It wasn't a lot. I mean, they were really top notch. The people were good about it, about talking to me. We're like, okay, we see what you sent us here. It wasn't really clear at first whether the my program description wasn't as clear as it should have been, and there was the pianist read that section at first. That while he was reading the text while he was playing, and I really wanted the soprano to the singer to do that part. So that took some finagling out, and they were really good about sort of returning to that. But they were professionals, 100%, in the sense that they didn't need very little coaching was required. It was just more like, this is what's going on. I see that we're going to be speaking here. That's, who's speaking here. They wasn't really sure, and I cleared that up. But outside of that, they just jumped right in and just did it as a scene.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the reason I ask is because sometimes as composers we kind of overthink things
Yeah,
like that, and
I
then
can
you
see
end up
that.
giving it to the player, and they're like, "Oh, this is actually pretty easy."
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, that probably definitely happened.
Yeah. My personal favorite part of this piece is when the singer starts to actually sing, like
Hmm.
the bel canto, because you kind of forget almost that that's a thing because you're so
Right.
used to hearing the narration and the speaking, and then when you hear the actual bel canto, you're like, oh, there's a singer in this piece. So that was a nice. I feel like if you did that in the beginning of the piece, I mean, you wouldn't get that same level of
Right.
surprise.
Yeah. 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 Surprise. The anticipation of it.
And I mean, of course, we only are seeing this movement in isolation, so we would have to see how that plays with the previous. Well, would this be the first movement? Is it or
That would
the
be
first
this
movement?
actually second. There's an introduction piece
Okay,
to that.
yeah. So I would be curious how that all folds together. Well, very cool. So what's the plan now in terms of your pieces? You're working on the piece, the draft that you
Yeah, I'm
showed
working
me
on the
now.
eighth one right now, which we showed, and I mapped out there to be actually 13 songs in this cycle, which is a bit long. I seen it in
Jesus Christ,
hindsight.
that's a
It's
lot.
kind of a log.
It's ambitious.
Yeah, I have that tendency to like, oh, I'm going to do this really long thing, and then hindsight. But it's good. I'm learning a lot. It's really fun. So, so the song cycle, I'm hoping, maybe to get a concert in the area, hire some musicians to play it, maybe in Boston or Western Mass or something. So I'm talking with people here and there. But where am I at the eighth one? I've got 4 or 5 more to go. I probably have about a years more worth of work, I think, perhaps, maybe less, depending on how things go. Something interesting.
How long is the piece going to be? you think?
I'm trying to keep it
What's
down
more?
to under 30 minutes, which I think is pretty long. I haven't actually timed it out yet, but each one is they're about a minute and 2 minutes each. But they seem to be it's hard to keep the time creep from happening for me. And that's been one of the things I've been struggling with trying to write something that is expresses the point that I'm trying to make, but is compact.
Schubert does that really well too. That's a
Yeah.
good example. But this piece is 3 minutes, so that would be on the longer end
Yes,
of each of your
exactly.
pieces. Yeah. And when you
Yeah.
have a live performance as well, I find that the live performance tends to be longer in duration than what the MIDI tells you.
Yeah, I could
So
see that.
there's also that going on as well. Very cool. It's interesting. You mentioned half an hour in 1 year. The late Steve Stuckey, who was my first composition teacher, actually, he would say that 30 minutes in 1 year for a concert composer, like a working concert composer, is
Hmm.
actually like pretty average. So
Mm.
to write 30 minutes in 1 year, like not as a quote unquote professional concert composer, I mean, it's like that's actually a lot of music. So I'm really impressed.
Well, we'll see what happens. We'll
Yeah,
see how it goes.
I probably clock in just under an hour of music a year, but again, I mean this is what I do all the time. So
Right.
it's
Sure. Certainly.
I
Yeah.
think people put a lot of pressure to clock in a lot of to write a lot of pieces, you know?
Hmm.
And yeah, I don't know how I feel about that
I
personally.
could.
Even my own composer friends that are like working
Yep.
composers, they tell me in private, I feel like I'm just writing a lot of music and
Mm.
I mean,
Interesting.
I don't think you feel that way. I think for you, it's the opposite effect. It's more of a spiritual experience. It's you have to
Yeah, I
do
almost feel
it.
like I'm not writing enough. I'm sort of at I mean, it's just a stage. I mean, there's moments where like where I feel dry, where we all feel dry. And
Yeah.
there'll definitely be 4 or 5, a week or even 2 weeks where I barely write anything, in terms of composing. Um, and it happens to everyone, certainly. But I've become comfortable with that now. There was a time when I wasn't comfortable with that, and I think that's what built up the pressure. When I was talking earlier about like when I started in writing during the pandemic. So maybe it's good in some ways, maybe it's not. Um,
Why don't you talk about that a little bit more? Like, why don't you feel the pressure nowadays, for example, if you don't write for a month or two, that you have the confidence to know that you can get right back in it? Like, where does that come from?
that's a solid question. I feel like where does that come from? I think that comes from time. I think from having many. I think I might have mentioned this on the group with one of the other folks there. There's been many times where I've pulled back and come up to music, pulled back from music, come up to music, and that it's been reliably always there when I needed it in terms of when an idea presented itself, whether it was a performance thing or a writing thing, that when I showed up and committed to it and committed to it in a way that like, okay, this is its own thing, its own little project, its own little idea that has its own parameters. As long as I honor those parameters, as deeply as I possibly can over time, whether it's, I need to sit here with this for a week or a year or 6 months, it will eventually, it'll eventually blossom into whatever it needs to be, which is, I mean, and I've done that a few times and it's really satisfying. So that's why I'm sort of at this point, like, wow, this is great. If I keep doing this, it's like cooking, I suppose. Once you learn how to cook something really well, it's fun to cook it again, and it's fun to improvise on that cooking at that point. It's like, wow, that was a great meal. Yeah, what if we add, like your thought experiment? Oh, what if I add vinegar? What if I, bring a tomato sauce in on there? It's to me, it's almost similar to that in some ways.
Yeah, and one thing that you touched up on is this idea of like if you have an idea that you really love, right? It doesn't matter to you if it takes 6 months, three
Right.
months, 1 year to
Yeah.
do. And to me, that's the whole thing that we were talking about, the why. Why are
Yeah.
you writing this piece of music? Or what I call the North Star. Why are you doing this? And if your why is strong enough, it's okay if it takes longer to do because when
Yeah.
you're done, you feel more satisfied. Just to
Yeah.
kind of, if I
Absolutely.
am I reading that right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. It sounds so simple, but it took me years to figure this out.
Right.
Because
No, it seems obvious,
for
right?
me, it was the opposite. It was like, oh, I just got to keep writing. If I keep writing every week, I'll get better. But I remember there was a time during my doctorate, I was working on so many goddamn commissions in a row, and I just kept thinking, and it sounds like a great problem to have, but
Right.
it was a problem because this is kind of turning into a therapy session for me now, but that's okay. I realized that I didn't have a why for writing these pieces.
Right.
The why was, oh, I got a commission. And it took me several years in a row to realize that's not a strong enough why,
Right.
which is a very humbling thing because
Interesting.
you work your whole life as a composer thinking that's the goal to get a bunch of
Right.
commissions. And then you realize, oh my, I'm in trouble. That wasn't the goal after all, because that's not,
Hmm.
you see, does that make sense?
Yeah, it
That
totally
is,
makes sense.
that is a turning point, I think, for a
Yeah, the
composer.
irony of that is so rich.
Yeah, extremely. And nobody really, and the only people that really understand this are the, of course, the composers that I know that are in this situation right now. And I just have to talk them through it and be like, hey, like I was exactly like how you are.
Hmm.
And it's an unbelievable situation to be in, truly, because you never think it's going to happen. And then if it
Right.
does, and you wonder why don't I feel so good about this? And then you
Hmm.
start to have these kind of thoughts like, wait, why did I do all this work and so on. It's
Right.
like, and so hearing your thing, your process is like is really exciting for me because it shows that,
Thank you.
you know, it doesn't have to be a situation where you're trying to be a working professional composer to be fulfilled by this process. You can really do it without having that be the goal. And that's the thing that I admire most about you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
no, I could see that. I could see where following the money thing, and not that you were not necessarily doing the commission thing as a following the money, but where money becomes a like I've sort of when I was younger and always playing, it was always when I was a performing musician it was like, wow, we played these gigs, this was great, we put all this energy in it, was awesome, people showed up, and then you'd make beer money or whatever, you'd make gas money, and there was the constant question was there's like, oh, why did we, why did we go through all that, you know? So I think kind of talking about the repetition thing earlier about like how do you maintain that interest, that connection, that sort of returns. I think that was for me, that was sort of that was part of that process. Like, oh, I'm not really getting paid as much as I would have thought I've gotten paid for these things. But okay, where's the interest? Yeah, where's the why? Why, what's happening here?
Right. And if you had a commission, let's say, to do the song cycle, it's very possible that they would have wanted a specific text or a
Yeah,
specific
right,
length or
right,
that you might have not been jiving with.
right, right.
And to be very frank, no amount of money that's being offered now, at least in professional circles, is really enough to justify spending a year, let's say, working on a
Yeah,
project like that. You know,
right.
like what would be the number? Because
Yeah,
whatever number you're thinking of,
yeah,
they don't even offer that to
right.
professional composer. So then it becomes like, okay, why am I doing this then? You know, so you finding out your why is like, for me, very inspirational. It's something I work through all the time and something that I try to remind myself and of course our members in our little community. Thank you so much, Kevin. This was great. Thank you.
It was really wonderful, Saad. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.